All right, welcome back to another video in the complete web development series. In this chapter, we are working with React.js and we're building an example application. It's a to-do app utilizing the API that we created with Node.js in the last chapter. And in the last video, what we did is we started talking about context and how we can easily use context instead of passing a bunch of information down through props from component to component. That will simplify our workflow quite a bit and also just help us alleviate some bugs and upkeep and things like that we don't really want to do. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to finish our login process and we're going to learn a new concept called we're going to use a new hook called useReducer. And so essentially what's going to happen is we are going to have a situation where we use a method called dispatch to dispatch some sort of message or signal, and then in our context we're going to have a reducer method that takes that in and possibly a payload, and it's going to say, okay, you called this, so I'm going to you sent this, so in order so we are going to update state and things like that. So it's basically a dispatch and listener system that basically you dispatch a message, the reducer receives that, and when it receives that, it takes action based upon that message and the payload that is sent. And that way it's always kind of listening, if you will, for a dispatched message to happen. And so we're going to utilize that to update our state and things like that, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. So let's go ahead and switch over to our screen here, and I just want to make sure we do have examp up and running. So it's opt lamp examp start, and mine is already running, but I want to just kind of make sure you have yours running. The main thing here is we just want MySQL actually running because we're going to be using our database. The next thing I want to do is let's go ahead and boot up our API. So this is the Node.js project we created in the last chapter. If you didn't follow along, you can go back to the first video and I'll show you how to install this. But we're just going to run npm start here, which opens up a port 5000 on localhost, and now we have a Node.js server running our API for our to-do application. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and actually run npm start on our actual to-do app, and this is going to fire up localhost 3000 here on our app, and so that's React is running, our development React is running on port 3000 there. So 5000 is our Node.js API, port 3000 is our React application. The last thing that we need to do here is we want to go ahead and create a new branch here, and we are on video 8. So I'm going to do a get checkout -b v8, and then I'm going to go ahead and do a get push -u origin v8 here. That will push that up to the remote server for you guys to grab, and at the end of this video I will push everything that we do in this video, and you can follow along if you have any bugs or anything like that that you want to see what's going on. Once we have that up and running, let's go ahead and look at our code and where we left off in the last video, and we're going to continue on with the login here. So what we might want to do, we could, yeah, let's work on a login. Now, if you don't have a user yet in your database, then you could check that by going to localhost /phpMyAdmin. And if you go down to your API, just look in your users and make sure you have a user row here. If you don't, just use Postman or something like that to post to your API, and you're going to need to send it fname, lname, email, password, and confirm password. I did that a few videos ago as an example. That way you can log in with this user. Alright, once you have that, let's go ahead and continue on here. And let's navigate to our login page. So that was /auth/login. And now you can see it takes us to a login form here that we created in the last video. And if we go ahead and open the inspector and we look at the network tab here, if I log in with the correct credentials, you know what, let's use the wrong credentials. We do get an error message here, and if I log in with the correct credentials, right now it's just going to return to us this token, and this is a JWT token that then we can store and use to show the application that we are currently logged in. And we'll be sending that token along with the rest of our applications for the endpoints that require authentication, like adding to-dos and contacts and such. Also, we'll use that to retrieve to-dos and contacts so that we make sure we're getting the correct information for the user who's logged in back, okay? So let's talk a little bit about how we want this to work. In our login.js, we have this success function, and right now when you log in, it's just console login that response. But what we need to be able to do is actually, we want to do a couple things. One, we want to store the token that's returned, and the way we're going to do this, we're just going to store that in local storage. And then what we want to be able to do is change and let our application know that we are logged in. Okay, and we're going to use a reducer for that. And then we want to also forward them to a home page. So we don't want to keep them on the same form once they're logged in. So we're going to accomplish all of those things in this video. First of all, though, let's go to our Auth Context here. And in Auth Context, what we want to do in this case is start looking at our reducer and how that works. So up here at the top, we're going to import another function called useReducer. Okay, so we're going to learn all about reducer. The next thing that we want to be able to do here is we want to create a function, okay? And we're only going to use this function here in this file here, so we don't need to export it. So let's just create it right here underneath this auth context, and we're just going to call it reducer. You can call it anything you want, but we're going to call it reducer, and the first parameter that reducer takes is your state. I think it's a little confusing to call it state. It does replace the use state syntax. You wouldn't typically use both, but I'm going to call it store. You could call it whatever you want, but we're going to call it store. And then it's going to take an action, okay? And we'll talk about what this action is in a moment. Action is going to be an object that's passed in that's going to have a couple of things. One, we can structure that any way we want, but the way this action is actually going to look when we send it in is action is going to have a type. And this type is going to be something like login or log out, or is logged in, things like that. We're going to have quite a few things, or even set user. That's the way it's going to look. And then if we have additional information we need, we're going to have a payload, and that payload can be another object full of whatever we need. Okay, so when we get that token back, we can actually send it here if we'd like to. So inside this reducer, what we're going to do here is we're going to actually use a switch statement. And what we're going to switch on is our action.type. Now, I showed you an example of what that type's going to look like, but I'll show you an example of sending that in a moment. But we're going to have this action.type. And let's set up a default case. The default case, what we want to be able to do is just return our store. So this reducer needs to return the store, or the state, or the data, if you will, at the end of this. So by default, that's all we're going to do there. But let's set up a case here, and we're going to do, let's say if action.type is equal to login, then what do we want to do? Well, we want to use local storage to set our token. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to say local storage. That's a JavaScript API that's built into our browsers. Okay, so we didn't install anything for this. And we're going to do a set item. And what we're going to set here is store.token name. Now we haven't set that yet, but we'll do that in just a moment. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set it to, the value that's going to be set to is our action.payload. In this case, it's going to be a JWT token that we receive from the backend. Okay, so that will set that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to update our store here with the new value, and then we're going to return that. So we'll just return, and then what we're going to return here is an object that has a destructured store. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change logged in to true. Now we haven't actually set these values up yet, so those don't even exist in store, but I'm going to show you how we can do that in a moment. So at the very least, our reducer function now is working, and it's going to be good enough for this video. We're going to add to this as we go to add a few different action types to handle a few different dispatched messages, because this is a function that's going to be called every time there's a message dispatched to this reducer. Okay, but notice we haven't used the useReducer function yet, and that's because we want to set that up here inside of our auth store. So above our return here, we're going to use const, and we're going to destructure this array here, and what we're going to get from this is the store and the dispatcher, or the dispatch method. Okay, and what we're going to get that from is the useReducer hook that we just imported, and this useReducer is a function here that we're getting from React. It's a hook here, and it's going to take two parameters, and the first parameter that's going to take is the function here that we're calling for the reducer. So this is going to be reducer. We'll just pass that right on down as the first method, or the first parameter rather. The next thing we want to do is we're going to have an object. So I'm going to go ahead and put an object here. And what we're going to do here is set up our initial state, or our initial store for this reducer. Okay, so we're going to have some store set up here, and this is very similar to setting up our initial state on for our form fields and stuff. But what we're going to have in here is our token name, and then for us, we're just going to put a string here called user JWT token. Okay, and then we're going to add another one called logged in. And by default, what we want to do is we're going to set this. We're going to find out if they have this set up in local storage. And so this is going to be a Boolean. It's going to be true or false. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say local storage dot get item. And the item that we're going to get here is our user JWT token. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that this is not equal to null. So what's going to happen is, if this doesn't exist in local storage, this user JWT token, it's going to return null. If it does exist, it's going to return that token here. And because this is conditional logic here, if it does return JWT token, then logged in is going to be equal to true. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is we're just going to set up an empty user object here. So that's the last little bit that our auth context store is going to keep. It's going to keep a token name. We could have done anything with that really. We could have just put that as a constant because it's not going to change. But we're going to also keep track of if they're logged in, and then we're going to have the logged in user stored here as user. So in order for us to use this though, we need to pass this down through our provider. So in our last video, we passed this user ID object down, and instead what we want to do is we're going to pass an array. And the array we're going to pass down first is our first element is going to be our store. So we're going to have our entire store passed down through this provider. The next thing that we want is we want this dispatch function that's going to end up calling this reducer and returning our updated store object. So here we're just going to return dispatch. Or I'm sorry, we're going to send dispatch down. That's good enough for now. We're going to actually add something to this later. But this auth context provider now, inside of its value, it has an array, and inside that array it has store and dispatch. And what that's going to allow us to do is to use the same syntax here where we can destructure this and call it whatever we want in the files where we use it. So let's go and take a look at that. Go ahead and go to the login.js now. And what we're going to do here is we already have this auth context up here. And so instead of getting our data from this context, we are going to go ahead and get, let's see, we're going to go ahead and get our dispatcher and our state. So what we can do is we can say const, and then what we could do is say auth store as a value, and then we're going to do auth dispatch here, which will just be our dispatcher, and that's going to be coming from this use context method, and we're going to pass in our auth context. So now what's going to happen is, because if you look at our auth context here, I'm sorry, where'd it go? Auth context, the value that's being passed down, we have store and dispatch in there. And so if you look here in login.js, the first thing that's coming out of that array is the store. So we're just calling it, we're setting it to a constant in this login function called auth store. And then our method that's going to be to dispatch something to our reducer is going to be called auth dispatch. Okay, and we get that from our context the same way that we got user ID as an example in the last video. And so what we're going to do in order to use this is now, instead of just console log in our response, what we want to do here is we want to call our auth dispatch function, dispatch, and when you call this, it's going to take an object, and this object, we need to send it a type. Now remember, on our reducer function we did a switch and the case went off a type, so we need to give it a type, and this type here is going to be login, and that will correlate with in our auth context here, it'll correlate with this case right here. So it's actually going to hit here, and what it's going to do is set local storage, and then it's going to change logged in equal to true. Okay, so back on our login.js here, we will dispatch that. Then what we want to be able to do is I'm not going to do anything just yet. Instead, let's just console log let's console log our auth store at that point. Okay, I think this will be a pretty good thing to do. And let's see, go ahead and clear that, and let's try to log in again, and let's see what happens. Okay, so if I logged in, now this isn't the response from the back end, this is actually our store, and you can see that what logged in is false, and the token name is JWT. But let's check the application, and let's look at local storage and see if we have anything set up here. Well, we have a JWT token, and that is set to undefined. Why is that set to undefined? Well, if we got a couple issues here to sort out. Well, it's set to undefined because if you look, let me just drag this over here. If you look at our auth context, we needed to set the value from action.payload, okay? And so what we have to do is we have to pass that payload in. So let's go ahead and look at that. We need to pass payload, and that is going to be equal to response.token. I think that's what it's called. Let's go ahead and look at that real quick. Yeah, token. So we have response.token, and now it has a payload. So now what happens is, if I go ahead and stop this now, well, let's try again. So we got that. Let's go to our console logged, and now if you look here, you can see that logged in is equal to true, and we have our token name there, but this initially was set to false, see? And after we called that dispatch method, it gets changed to true. Now let's go and look at our application, and now you can see if you look here, we do have a key with user JWT token, and the value is equal to our JWT token that our Node.js server sent back to us. So now we have stored in local storage a JWT token that we can use to send along with our network request. So let's go ahead now and try to finish up a couple of things on top of that. What I want to be able to do now is I want to make an API call, and this API call is going to populate our logged in users information from our API. And so in order to do that, let's go ahead and go back to our auth context. And what we're going to do is I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to create it inside of this auth store here. We could do this a few different ways, but let's just do it like this for now. And I'm going to call it get user. And what we want to do here is this get user is going to do a couple things. We're going to check if store.loggedIn, so if it's logged in, and we want to make sure that we haven't already gotten it, because we don't want this to trigger more than once on accident, just to save some API calls. We're going to check if store.user has own property ID. If it doesn't have its own property, we're going to reach out through with an API call to get that. So let's go ahead and import our JSON get function from, let's see, we are here and we need to go to helpers, and that comes from Ajax. So here what we're going to do is we will, let's see, we're going to await. Well, we'll do a const response is equal to await JSON get, and we want to go and go to the users and logged in user. That's the path on our API that we built out to get the logged in user. And then what we want to do here is for now, well, let's do if response.success. So we get a success response back. Then what we're going to do is dispatch. We're going to use our reducer again, but now we're calling this dispatch method directly in here, and this will take an object, and this time the type is going to be set user, because if we get a user back from the back end, we want to do that. But the payload now is going to be response.user. Okay, so let's go ahead and add that to our switch statement here. So right here, we're going to add a case for that new dispatched message called set user. And underneath that, we're going to return our store object. So we'll destructure store here. And then now what we want to do is set our user equal to our action.payload, because we're passing payload in as the response user, and when we do that, it's going to set that user object up like that. Okay, let's see, what else do we want to do? I think that's it. So that'll just return that. Pretty straightforward little dispatch thing there. Let's see, let's try that out. So I'm going to save. We'll go back here. I'm going to hit never on that. And let's try again. This time what's going to happen, I'm going to open up this network tab and let's clear this out and see what happens. When I hit login, it makes a request to the login. It gets the token back. It should have made another call and it did not. So let's figure that out. Oh, so we actually need to call this get user function. We didn't do that. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to pass that as a third parameter down in our provider. So it's going to be called get user. And then our login.js here, what we want to do here is we want to, underneath our auth dispatch, we're going to use await, since it's going to make, oh, come on, get user. Now, oh, come on, why is it doing that? Let's just get it first. So the function is going to come from this use context. We're passing it as a third parameter. So let's just call that get user, just like that. And now we should be able to get user. There we go. So now we're getting our function from this context, and we can call that there. So let's save that. Now when we log in, let me clear this. It should actually make 2 network requests, one after the other. So it makes the login. It still didn't make that get user request. What's going on there? Let's try again after I refresh. One of 2 requests. I don't care about the pre-flight there. What's happening? Let's go and look at our get user function and make sure. Let's since we're debugging this, let's go ahead and make sure our logic isn't screwed up here. And what we're going to do is just let's console log. Let's just first find out that this is running. Get user runs. All right, and clear this out. We'll again log in. Go to console log, and it is running. Store.user.hasOnProperty is not a function, and that's because I missed a T there. So that's probably what our problem is. Let's clear this out and try again. There we go. So now let's look at the network, and now you can see that it made the login network request, and then it made this logged in user request. And if we looked at that, we got the user back with my name. Okay, and let's look at the headers real quick. Let's see. We should have, let me make this a little bigger here. If you look at the request headers, we have an authorization header that's sent, and what's cool here is the way we set up our form or our fetch function in our Ajax. It actually checks for this JWT token in our local storage, and if it's there, it adds authorization bearer token to the request headers, and that's how our Node.js application takes that token and knows who we are and that we're logged in. Okay, so that's how our API gets that information. So we know that now we have the information we need. If we're logged in, we can make authenticated requests to our API. Okay, so we have to do a couple more things. Let's look at our console now, and if you look, we are our user object doesn't appear to be populated. So let's find out why. Let's go back to our login.js. So I would hope that this auth.store then would have a user in it. So let's look at this. In our auth context, we know this runs. It dispatches the set user with the payload. It gets here, returns a store, action.payload is the response.user. Let's await get user. Look at that get user. Okay. This get user function's not returning anything here. I think that's a problem. It dispatches get user. At the end of this, I think what I'm going to do is just return. We can return anything. We could return the user. Yeah, let's return store.user at the end of this get user method. And let's just try that out. Okay. Success true. User has an ID. What did I do wrong here? Let's console log this action. Let's go here. I'm going to clear this out. Dispatch. I got something really screwy here. Some debugging is probably good for us to look at. I'm going to say response right here. Let's see when this is triggered. This could be an asynchronous problem here that we need to figure out. Right, so it's not actually, okay, there might be something wrong with our JSON get function because it's not actually doing this console log right here, which means it actually isn't calling this dispatch. So let's go now and look at our helpers, Ajax. All right, so we're not passing a callback function into here, so it should just be returning the response here. JSON get returns this. Let's make this function an async function. Don't know if that, this returns fetch. No, I don't need to make this an async function here. Let me double check my reference here and see. I probably have some stupid thing going on here. Well, let's just drop in a console log here. And I'm just going to put run fetch. Hope this isn't. All right, now we got the okay. So run fetch. This is actually the login. This gets the user. So it didn't run that a second time. What is happening here? Let's look at response. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's console log type of callback. This should be undefined, which wouldn't be equal to function. Yeah, it doesn't. Oh, I'm so dumb. Let's pass if true here for now, so it makes the network call each time. All right, now we have set. Okay, geez. There's our user. Okay. Wow. Okay. We're good to go. So there was something here that was actually stopping this from running again. There's nothing wrong with our Ajax function here. So I'm going to go close that out. And then we had this response here. So let's see here, if not store that has okay. There's a couple other things we need to do to make sure this works. And what that is we're going to also use our, we're going to use another React hook here. And this one is simply a useEffect. And what useEffect does is basically every time that it runs the render method on this function here, when it returns this, every time it calls this function, we have this useEffect. So what we can do is after the DOM has been painted, we can call some sort of function each time. Now we don't want to do anything crazy there because it could cause us a cycle. It could do it over and over again. So we need to be careful about that. But what the way to use this is we're going to say useEffect. And this takes an anonymous function, or any function rather, as the first parameter. And what we want to do here is we're going to say, hey, if store.loggedIn, and if there's not a store.user has own property of ID, then what I want to do is I want to call our getUser method. Okay. So let's go ahead and check that out and see what happens. Let's clear this out here. I'm gonna call password. Okay, so we have now our user object being passed back in our store. It's being set. If I go to the register page and then come back to this, let's see. Actually, we want to make sure that we're not running this a ton of times. So what we want to do here is the useEffect takes a second parameter, and what we can do is say, hey, anytime store.loggedIn is changed, then we want to call this getUser. We want to call whatever's in this function. So if this changes to false, it's going to call this, but the store.loggedIn will go false, so it won't call the getUser. But then if it goes from false to true, then it's going to look and say, hey, we don't have our user, and it's going to go ahead and grab the user from the back end. Okay, so we have that. Let's go ahead and just wrap up a few more things here. Let's finish up this reducer here. We could do a log. Yeah, we're going to have a case called isLoggedIn. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to do const loggedIn is equal to local storage.getItem. And then we're going to look for store.tokenName. We're going to make sure that that is not equal to null. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to return our store, and we're going to update that logged in to our logged in value here. All right. So I know this is a little confusing because it confused me too, and I'm still a little confused by it. So the way this works is we're going to call. Oh, one thing I want to do here is after our success function runs on the login.js, the last thing that we want to do here is after we call this getUser, we're going to want to go do a history.push, and we're going to send them to the root directory of our application. Now we already imported this use history here and set it up here. So history.push is a method that comes from this use history. From the React router DOM thing. The other thing is we're never really using this auth store here. So what we can do is we can just delete that, but leave that comma, and it's not going to set it up. So in this instance, we don't, from this auth context, we don't really need that store in this particular part of the application. So we can just remove that to get rid of the warning there. The next thing that we want to do, so it's going to redirect them. So let's try that real quick. And now you can see that it's taken us to our home page, which is going to, right now, it's just going to be the app index. Okay. So you can see this H2 is still there. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of magic there. And instead, what we want to be able to do in our app index, actually, let's go ahead and build out some of this in our app index to check if they're logged in. Okay. So we're going to do a couple things here. React router DOM. Let's go ahead and use or import our switch, route, and use history from React router DOM. The next thing that I want to do is I want to get our auth context. Okay, well, we already have that here. Great. We can get rid of this form. We don't need that, so we can get rid of this. Get rid of this for now. Get rid of this field block. And then let's go ahead and start setting some stuff up in this app index. We can get rid of a lot of this. We can get rid of this whole thing here. Let's get rid of this, and let's get rid of this, and kind of start from a blank slate here. So first thing we'll do, let's set up history, and that's going to be equal to our useHistory function that we imported from our React Router DOM library. And then what we want to do is we're going to get our auth store and our auth dispatch, and that's going to come from our use context, and we'll pass our auth context into that. So we have auth store and auth dispatch, and we don't really need our get user method from here because we're going to use the dispatcher. So let's go ahead and set that up. And what we're going to do is every time this is rendered, we want to use the useEffect hook. So we're going to need that too. So let's change this use state to useEffect. And in our useEffect, remember this as the first parameter is going to take an anonymous function, and then we're going to call something. And what we want to call here is our Auth Check. So do Auth Check. And I'm going to pass an empty array here. And what that means is basically this is only going to run this one time. Whatever this is in here is only going to run the first time this is rendered. So it's not going to do it a second time. All right, so then what we're going to do is we're going to come down here and we're going to say, I'm going to create an Auth Check function. So we'll do function. And you know what, we'll make this an async function. So an asynchronous function called Auth Check. And what we're going to do here is we're going to await our auth dispatch. And what we want to dispatch here is type. Oops. And what we're going to check is logged in. Okay. Then what we're going to do is after that we're going to say, hey, const, well, we'll just do it this way. If not auth store dot logged in, then what we're going to do is we're going to use our history dot push to send them to the auth login page. For now, we won't do anything else there. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to have this function return auth store dot logged in. Okay. Now we're getting a little bit of a thing here that's saying it's missing a dependency, and I want to use this like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to say ESLint. We're going to put a comment here. Disable next line React hooks exhaustive depths. And that takes away that little warning right there. You won't get a warning. So this is kind of annoying. But our ESLint, which checks our JavaScript to make sure we don't have any serious problems, that is what will go ahead and that's basically the thing that happens that checks our JavaScript. And because we're not including anything in here, not everything that's in here is included in this thing, they're giving us a little warning and saying, hey, you might not be running this as much as you want. And I only want this to run one time. So in fact, I'm gonna just disable that warning. So let's get rid of this and refresh. And let's see here. So it did run the logged in user and got back that user. But let's go ahead now and just try this out by going to our application, and I'm gonna remove our JWT token. And now if we refresh, what happened? It took us to our login. So let's try that again. it's going to keep forwarding us to this login, and it's doing that because we have no business being on that home page if we're not logged in. So let's go ahead and try to log in. And now we're here and it doesn't redirect us, and we can see now we have a JWT token that is set up. So we are now officially logged in. And in fact, you can see in our menu, it'll say, "Hi Curtis," because now we have that. Well, actually, let's go. Let's see. Do I want to do that? How long have we been in this video? Yeah, let's go ahead and update our menu real quick if it's not going to take too long. Elements. So let's go to our main navigation here. Main nav.js. Right now I have "Hi Curtis" just hard coded in there. And instead what I want to be able to do is I want to get that from our store. And so we can do that right here. We can actually import our auth context from context, auth context, and then inside of this main nav, we can set up our auth store and our auth dispatch, and we can get that from use context. We'll pass in our auth context there, and we need to import use context in order to use it. There we go. Now what we can do is, instead of hard coding "Hi Curtis" here, what we want to be able to do instead is we are going to say "hi," and we'll put curly brackets there, and then we're going to get our auth store.user $.fname, or if that doesn't exist, then we're just going to say an empty string. So we'll just say "hi blank." We could put "stranger" here or something like that, but it should never get to that point. So let's go and look at that now, and nothing should have changed except for this is coming from our auth store now. You can see that it does populate that from our actual store. So now what's really cool about this is now we're sharing data between all of these different places, and yeah, that's really cool. Let's do one more thing while we're here. Let's create another function, and we're going to call this function logout. And our logout function is just going to do an auth dispatch, and what we're going to dispatch here is a type of logout, and we don't need to send any sort of payload, so that's it. And then what we'll do is we will do a history.push, and we're going to push them to the auth login screen. And this messed up because we need to set up that history. So const history is going to be equal to our use history function. So there we go. We'll save that. And then this logout, this on click down here, what we can do is we are going to call our logout function. So let's try that out. Actually, we need to go to our auth context here, and we're going to create the let's create our logout here. So we need to add another case to our reducer, and here we're going to say logout, and what we want to do here is we're going to do a local storage.remove item, and what we're going to remove from here is store.item token name. Then what we're going to do is return our store, and we'll update that with logged in, set to false, and our user is going to be set back to an empty thing like that. Now, if I empty this out, we'll refresh. We have a logged in user. If I click log out, if we go to our application and look in local storage, we no longer have a JWT token there. So let's go ahead and try the whole process out. Let's log in. Oops. It logs us in, says hi Curtis, and now we can log out. And then it removes our JWT token, and if we try to go back to the home page, it's going to give us a problem and send us back here. So our login and log out functionality is complete. I'm pretty happy with that. And the next video, what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and knock out our other authentication route that could be, and that is going to be our sign up form that we haven't created yet. So I hope you guys are enjoying this. Please comment, like, subscribe, tell me what you guys have learned, and we'll keep going. Peace out.